E nā mana, e nā reo, e nā karangamaha. Tēnā koutou katoa, mā loso e fua mauma, langi mamā. Warm Pacifica greetings to everyone here as well. Look, it's just Apollo here. It's no Philip and whoever who was supposed to turn up here. So I've been voluntold to turn up by the two new chairs, both two new alpha females that have taken over, so their first action. So you'll probably see a few things happening there in Draw now. Look, just to feedback from our whono, so we had it here on Chorus. We had about 95 people there. We had about 75 RSVP, and then Pacifica, another 25 turn up. So the outline of the day, in the morning we had pretty much a more sort of a high-level presentation from the Ministry of Health. And that was Richard, who we had the honour of turning up there. And he talked mainly about some of the funding priorities that was coming out with the new money in mental health and addictions. He also talked about and acknowledged the demand that's happening around our services and how a lot of our services are sort of just adjusting and finding ways to manage the demand with the current funding they have in there as well too. He opened up with some questioning, which was rather brave, but as Pacifica, they were quite respectful and responded in kind as well too. So I just want to acknowledge Richard for doing that, for opening up and fielding those questions. We also had Ebenezer and Florence, where Richard was talking more around the funding, around some of those priorities for funding. We had Florence and Ebenezer talk about how that funding would look like on an operational level, and they talked about models of care. They also looked about, what did I have there? About somehow we could look at more specific funding for Pacifica services and what that would look like on the ground as well too. They also mentioned about what would be happening in the mainstream. We acknowledge that Pacifica services are quite a small number, and same for our workforce, but how do we draw up that accountability from our mainstream services that are meeting the demands or the large demands of our Pacifica out there in the workforce or in the services as well. We had Monique talk about Lavar's work and the priorities around suicide prevention, youth, and then looking at some of the new frontiers that we need to look at around managing the complex issues that our Pacifica people face, or all of our people face, but the need to work across and come up with actually complex solutions to meet some of those gaps that's happening out there as well. We heard about the lived experience voice, and that was really important. And what came out there about the need for a Pacifica national leadership framework. We heard from the youth voice, because we know that our youth voice is important for Pacifica, for all of us, and how we engineer and recalibrate our service to meet that demand. We know that the majority of our population in Pacifica are young, so we need to make sure that we're geared towards that future. And have a look at some of the frontiers that we need to look at, the digital space. What are we doing in that digital space? And what that means for us in meeting those traditional values to contemporary execution. In the afternoon, we saw more of that local flavour. We had our keynote speaker, Carlo, talk about entanglement and some of the values and some of the ways that we negotiate that space as well too. And then we heard from Pacille around online gambling and that new area that I just mentioned before around online gambling, online gaming, and how do we meet that new demand that's coming through that we know that a lot of our young people and men live in as well too. So what are we doing there? And especially how online gaming has introduced that gambling factor in there as well too. Like if you need to move to the next level, you need to buy that new weapon, new sword, and then that slowly draws our people into that sort of addiction or gambling phase. Then we started hearing from down south, our colleagues down south, Moana House, what they're doing, the really fantastic work they're doing there with the courts. We heard from Samoa, and the drug court work that they're doing there, that they're piloting up there. And then we heard from Tonga as well. Some of the key themes, I mentioned the demand on services. That's a factor that we all hear about, the strain that's on the services and our workforce. And also acknowledging that the strengths that are coming out there, that how we've been compelled to work in innovative ways with a limited funding and the limited workforce to meet those demands, to meet those outcomes and the needs of our families and our service users. Equity was a big one that came through. what's happening for Pacifica out there. We know that there's new funding out there, but how do we make sure that we're addressing the issues around equity? Our people, Māori and Pacifica, still are well below that quota around how do we meet the gaps that they're turning up to the services. What are we delivering? Are they quality services? Do they actually meet the needs and the issues that are coming up? Accountability. It was quite strong that came out about in the ministry. If we're talking about equity, what are we doing to make sure that we're actually delivering those services and we're calling into account those services that are talking about Pacifica, they get funded for Pacifica, but not really delivering that quality work that we need. And again, we talk about the systems thinking, that we can't work in silos. We need to think about outside those sectors or those sort of little silos that we work in. It doesn't just mean mental health and addictions, it means looking outside when we talk about the primary sector, about the local communities, the churches and that as well too. And the VAR. So we talk about the VAR, what does that actually mean on the ground? If you're not aware, the VAR is that sacred space that Pacifica acknowledged between myself and others. And how do we nurture and cherish that VAR? Not just in our traditional ways, but what does that mean in us here in New Zealand in 2019 onwards to 2025 and so forth? Drua Execnet, and as I mentioned, we voted in two co-chairs. So Helen and Pasil, very strong alpha females there that we'll probably see a lot happening there. And straight away, they talked about what our priorities are for planning. One of the points that came out was our lived experience. What are we doing as Drua around our leadership experience for consumer leadership framework? How do we tie that into our planning, our strategic thinking? Strengthening our workforce. That means working closely with LAVAR, DAPANS, but how we can prioritise and build this workforce. What do we need to fast-track them through? Our voice and national strategy. What does that mean now for Drua? We need to take that step up, not just from organising our Drua conferences, but the next stage around consultation with key stakeholders about where we can bring that Pacifica voice in there. And then alignment with Māori as well. I'm aware that our Māori colleagues met on the same day, but we want to make sure that we're aligned with our Māori colleagues about what's going forward as well. And that just means about talking and finding out what's happening as well too. Acknowledgements. We just want to acknowledge Phil. Phil's been one of the mainstays in pushing Drua through. Even though he said he was exiting and retiring 2 years ago, he was still there trying to ask for funding, ask what we're doing for Drua. So we just want to acknowledge the great work that Phil does. I won't get Phil on the microphone because he starts going off in sort of philosophical stuff, so we need to keep a sort of tight rein around that as well. We want to acknowledge DAPANS and Cutting Edge as well for always putting that space aside for Pacifica. It's really important space, and we've noticed that our people love coming together. We rarely get to get that time together as well, so it's really important that we still have that for us. So we just want to say thank you to Cutting Edge and DAPANS on that as well too. And I suppose for me, just a thank you to all the presenters that were there. And I see them there for making that day a good day as well too. Whawhate lava mo lava noa, manui lava aso.
He atahau e wawara mai he tū he rāke. Nana ia mai te pūpū tarake he ki uta. E tikina tu e au ki te kōtū, ko ke me mai ai ko ia te pau whakairo ka tū ke. Wai te mata i oku wairangi e, tihei mauri ora. E te whakarua kāka e noho nei, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko mātou ngauri o manu manu rawa ko mai aroa.
We are the descendants of Manu Manu and Maioro.
Ko mātou ngā hapū o Ngāti Whātua ki o rākai.
We are of the Hapu Ngāti Whātua ki o Rākei.
Ko mātou ngā uri o Ngāti Whātua.
We are the descendants of Ngāti Whātua.
Ānei a mātou taki.
This is our challenge that we lay today. We began this kōrero with a 400-year pepeha of our tūpuna Tītahi, of which narrates a message of a nearing time of change. A reminder that we are indeed in a time of reflection. Yet more importantly, the time to seize the opportunity and to take action at leading change for Māori by Māori. An opportunity where we as a nation know the difference between looking and seeing. Know the difference between acknowledgement and understanding, and are very clear about the difference between intention and action. This all begins with he taonga te iwi Māori. We, as Māori, are very precious. We are a taonga that come from our atua. We are the land, we are the waterways, we are our mountains. We are our atua within us. We are also our tupuna. We have their experiences, we have their grief, and we have their aroha. These things are intrinsically within us. They are in our DNA. They are what makes us who we are. They are what we are. We are Māori. We are not granted in the current system the ability to remember. We are not granted this as practitioners, nor as whānau using the services in our current system. This beginning is actually intentional at its beginning. It's the orokohanga of the system. Its purpose was oppression. Therefore, the current system isn't actually broken. It has served its purpose in the unravelling of connection, identity, belonging, and tino rangatiratanga.
And therefore, from our Ngāti whātuatanga, our needs and aspirations for actionable change are quite simple. An ōrākei, kōkiri, declaration of change, of action, of which the actions include. We will create a tāmaki makaurau collective where we can come together, kōrero, build whanaungatanga, and put a stop to the constant silos that we are forced to be part of. We will ensure that our whānau are included, engaged in, and lead Māori addiction leadership, and will be held accountable by us as Ngāti Whātua. We will nurture and promote te reo rangatira, te reo Māori as a rongoā. It will be mandated to be present in all healing spaces. Māori need and will be healing in our spaces, and our reo is one part of that rongoā. We will support a nationally regulated addiction workforce body that will be driven by the sole cause of kaitiakitanga, protecting, enhancing, maintaining our taonga as Māori. This will not be just a token Māori addition or an incorporated afterthought, and will be our commitment to bringing life to the kōrero of which we hear constantly, what is good for Māori is good for everyone. We will support the development, pathways of where whānau can thrive, for whānau who have lived the journey of addiction. These will support more opportunities for these whānau to return to run the services of which supported them in the first case. These will acknowledge, they will validate their experience as Māori, and will be prevention and early intervention focused. This will take a practical route of what happens between the kaiawhina, kaimahi, mea Māori, and our tangata whenua, tangata whānau. And this will not be solely a clinical route, but will live in conjunction as an incorporated whanaungatanga in that space. And mātauranga Māori, the knowledge of which we bring as Māori and we develop through experiences, will be held in such a high regard, if not higher, than that of the medical models of which we lay at the forefront in this current system. And lastly, we will work with anyone who has the passion, who has the heart, who has that commitment, who has the balls to come and noho with us, wānanga with us, and build true whanaungatanga to be our partners in this journey for Māori, for all people of Aotearoa. That is our tino rangatiratanga o Ngāti Whātua. That is who we are as Ngāti Whātua Heru Hāpai. That is our wero. That is our opportunity we lay for us all. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ka mō tātou, anō he mihi atu ki a koutou, e tautokona nā mihi mena moe a o tā rā. O te atanei, tāno ki tēnei wā, nō rei he keri, e mihi atu ki a koe. Huri noa ki nā hāhi wairua tanga wangi a koutou, tēnei te mihi. Ki ngā moihotanga mātauranga hoki, wangi a koutou, kia ora tātou. So to whatever higher power goes with you fellas today, go well. With whatever the wisdom and knowledge that you bring, acknowledge that. So what you've just heard is actually part of the important part of the pre-cutting edge hui this year. When we originally thought about pre-cutting edge hui, some of you will remember many of the Māori groups, caucuses, kokai. We used to meet during the lunch hours or morning tea at Cutting Edge, and most of us wouldn't come to the hui, to the conference because we were too busy having our hui. In Palmerston North, a million years ago when we had a Cutting Edge there was a movement to say that we need to move ourselves into a place where we can actually have a relationship with mana whenua, with the locals, and also begin our business so that we can come committed to the conference. In that space, we took on a role to facilitate that day and to particularly work with local services and the local hapu or iwi who hopefully had a relationship with the local services to host the pre-cutting edge. This year, we've had a collaboration between all those Māori working in services here in Tamaki Makaurau, and particularly working with Ngāti Whātua. And then there's been the likes of Mātua Raki, and I've got to give big ups to Kat for all the work that she's done. Also Tauora and the other services have sponsored the day. What it actually demonstrated was that collaboration, and I think as much as we were talking about many of the similar issues that the Pacifica Whānau were talking about, we were really about consolidating our perspective in a consistent way as Māori, but also saying our local iwi, our local hapu also need to be a part of that place. And what you've just heard from Tūrakawa and also from Hera very much epitomises that we see the importance of that relationship. So during the day we discussed things like the opportunities that present, and Maria Baker gave us a really good overview of all the different opportunities that Māori currently have, all the opportunities that those of you working with Māori currently have to bring us into that space. So again, what are the relationships like? What are the kinds of things? And it needs to go beyond just the superficial and the ritual into how does, if you like, the cultural capital contribute to that therapeutic space. that it's there in a meaningful and integrated way. So much of what we talked about on that first day were opportunities of that integration, how it would look. What are the challenges for us as we also think about what we can bring to that equation? We certainly started to think about drug court was a big one. Of course, it's popular here in Auckland. People were also asking, what would it look like when it goes out beyond here, in what a way, shape or form? So the importance for certainly Māori services to be a part of thinking, what do we need to do to be prepared? And again, very much like Drua, what our national leadership would look like in order to support those kind of moves, but also, more importantly, I suppose, our local leadership. And again, the declaration saying that the Auckland providers and those working in other providers needing to come together to be a Māori voice, to be able to contribute to decision making, particularly around the opportunities involving Māori, is a strong theme. We also had the chance to think about an important issue for us, and thinking about going into that prevention space and even thinking about a wellbeing space, looking at fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and more importantly, its impacts for whānau and what that means for our communities. I think for Māori, talking about whānau ora and wellbeing, it's an important part of the spectrum that we need to be thinking about, not only the whole whānau, but also into that prevention and promotion space. We had the opportunity to think about the ways we think about our models, are the ways we think about the way we deliver messages still appropriate. And I think certainly what was brought forward when we thought about youth was the challenge for us, even as Māori practitioners, Māori services, to always be reflecting on, can we do better? And that's not just about competency, that's also about thinking about new ways. And I think the challenge from the idea of kokiri that was just spoken about, that idea that I can see the future coming and it's going to be very different, be prepared. It's also the challenge, I think, that came out at the Hui on Wednesday, that really we need to be prepared. We can't just be carrying on. Just being Māori isn't enough. Actually, we need to be, because we're in the sector, we also need to be thinking about what does that mean in our sector, how do we keep moving forward to be provide leadership in the sector. And I think very strongly who are our stakeholders, and that's whānau, who are our allies in this, and it's everybody in this room, but it's also those in other sectors. So that conversation filtered through many of the different discussions we had on the day. We also had the privilege also being graced by some conversation that you're going to hear a little later on around other people's experience of what drug reform could look like, and particularly the shift to moving towards thinking about, certainly in the cannabis space we're moving into, the health and the wellbeing perspective, not just the handcuffs and the criminal justice perspective. And so for the Māori out there and those working in that space, really encourage you to come to that hui at lunchtime. And it's a great opportunity for us to, again, get a sense of consistency. At the end of the day, I think what the hui really highlighted for us were a couple of things. One, that even though we had people on programs, people who have been on programs, people who are running programs, people who are interested, at the end of the day it was us being Māori. And what shone through really was, regardless of the colour of the patch that they were wearing, whether it was Higher Ground, Odyssey House, Salvation Army, Emerge, at the end of the day our take was about whānau and whānau wellbeing. And I think that was one of the important parts. And the challenge for those taking on pre-cutting edge in the future is not just about us in services, but also our relationship with the local iwi, local hapu, and how we bring them to the party. And they take responsibility for looking after us as well, our own, and those that they manaki in the territory. So I think for much of the day, it was very similar to what the Hui Fono had in terms of the topics and the take, but actually the most important thing about the day was that we got to meet with the locals. We got to also come to a sense of there's a need for us to collaborate, there's a need and challenge for us to think about our leadership, and I think I definitely like the idea of the national leadership framework for drill, because I guess in Māori, many of us assume leadership roles because we're the last one standing, or because we're the slowest. But actually in that space we still have a responsibility and we need to be held accountable. And I think that's the other big thing about the hui. It gives us a chance to hold those who stand up and wave the flag to be accountable to our own, and that's an important part of us being grounded as well. So as I say, we covered many topics, but I think the key thing that came through was the vitality of those that were there who demonstrated that treatment works. Those who demonstrated for us that tikanga and mātauranga Māori as part of that therapeutic process makes a hell of a difference. And that everybody, it was about whānau at the end of the day and aspirations for the future. So for me, I think those were the key themes that come through, and it's a challenge. The bar was set really high for the future cutting edges and other hui that will be held around the country. So kia koutou, kia kaha. And again, I'd like to thank the Cutting Edge organising for allowing this space to be part of the conference proper, as opposed to the bit while everybody's still recovering from the night before, because it does make a difference. It says that both Pasifika and Māori, and in this case also Ngāti Whātua, make a difference. Nō reira, aha ko i te noho, kanu te mihi kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Enjoy the hui, enjoy the conference. Don't forget, whakawhanaunga, meet, greet, but no poaching. Kia ora tātou.
He aha te hau, e wawara mai. He huhera ki nāna, ia mai te puputara ke heke uta e tiki nā tue au. Te kotu ko ia te pau whakairo ka tū ki wai te mata. Ai oku wairangi e kōkiri. Tēnā tātou.